All right, well, welcome to another video. We're going to talk a little bit today about insurance. I'm here with Brian Walters and David Dewarf from Walter & Walter Insurance Agency here in Winchester, Virginia. I'll let you guys go through, talk a little bit about Walter & Walter, when you guys opened up, how long you've been in business, all that good stuff.
You want me to do it because I own it? All right, perfect. So, yeah, actually, so our agency was started in 1979 by my father. Was incorporated back then, had a different name formerly, and then we broke apart in 2008. And so I came into business about 2002. We've been in business for 43 years. We got two locations. We got one in Winchester, got one in Woodstock as well. We have dozens of carriers, fit all types of needs. But I took over then. I'm the president of Walter & Walter. Dave is our office manager and our commercial line specialist. So he knows probably more than anybody in the office. So it's good to have him along. And thanks for inviting us here, man.
Absolutely. Dave, how long have you been with Walter & Walter?
I've been with Brian and Walter & Walter since 2013, so going on 10 years.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So, I got into the business formerly in motorcycle industry and things like that. Just felt like a career change and was a good opportunity to get in insurance and make a great career.
Well, we'll jump into a little bit. And, obviously our topic today is rental properties. That's kind of what we're focusing on, and I want to hear from your guys' perspective. We can go through the details and the weeds, get into that a little bit, but just in general, if you guys want to talk a little bit about what does insurance look like? What does insurance do? What's the purpose? Why do people have insurance? Most people know the answer to this, but I think you guys being in the business can probably give a wider outlook on that than just your everyday regular person would have.
Yeah, I'll just give a real quick overview. So there's probably a few things about most insurance policies, people need to know about. There's a couple key factors, right? And, when you're owning a property or something like that, you want to make sure, number one, that, the building that you own is properly insured, right? And, from experience that the market today for reconstruction costs on buildings are much higher than they were 5 years ago, right? Cost of all these goods went up. And so there is a good chance a lot of people have a policy that they may have a building insured for X amount of dollars, and 5 years ago that was enough. Today's prices, that may not be enough anymore, right? And so, insurance policy is going to cover that reconstruction of that property that they own up to a certain amount. So if they have a building insured for $200,000 5 years ago, but all of a sudden today it's worth $300,000, if their insurance has not been escalated to kind of meet that same amount of coverage, then a lot of times they could be out with a loss, right? If something happens, it's total loss. The insurance company says you have $200,000 on it, but it's going to cost $300,000. Then it gives you that gap you're going to be responsible for. The second biggest part of that policy is the liability coverage, the protection, right? You got people that are in there renting it. If they have a dog and the dog bites somebody, or if you're not requiring them to carry their own insurance, then somebody comes on the property and gets hurt. That's where, the building owner is responsible for it. So in that kind of rental world, you need to have a couple of those main key factors. And then you have to also, if you own appliances and things like that in there, then you're going to have some contents coverage as well. But the liability portion is what gives you the most protection in a rental property scenario like that.
Okay. And for something like that, do you need to have an LLC set up to have that type of insurance?
No, you don't. I mean, you oftentimes have these rental units. It could be individuals, personally owned, husband and wife duo. They could have an LLC, limited liability corp set up, a physical corporation set up, president hierarchy type stuff, but it doesn't require an actual business entity to be formed. Obviously, we'll see that with a lot of people as they have multiple properties. That becomes more of a business type exposure, and clients probably want that added. But we set them all the time: personal names, corps, LLCs, you name it. Sometimes it's just organizations, it's nonprofits. There's a whole slew of ways to get commercial insurance to cover those, what appears to be like a commercial property or rental property.
Now, one thing you might want to remember too, though, and you might find a good corporate attorney, right? Because they will tell you that there is a stopgap that you get in there when you form an LLC or a corporation, right? They can't sue outside the limits of the corporation. So that protects you personally from owning the property. But like Dave said, a lot of times we have people that may just start out and buy one property or buy two properties. They keep it in their name, and you can obtain all this insurance, whether it's a sole prop, whether it's an LLC, whether it's an S corp, any of those. Doesn't have to have a legal corporate entity
Gotcha.
To get insurance.
Yeah, we talked a little bit in one of the other videos that we did with CPA, and he was talking some of the benefits of just having those separated. What does it look like if it's in an LLC? What does it look like if it's not? And some of the benefits and some of the downsides of all that. But to go back to just what Walter and Walter does, what's the difference between good insurance and bad insurance? Oftentimes, there's a lot of, especially in a real estate office, you'll hear a lot of sales pitches from a lot of different insurance carriers that are, well, we have good insurance, we have bad insurance. What does that mean? I mean, from a broad perspective, what's the benefit and what's the downside, and is it worth the extra money? Is it not? How do you decide those things? What goes into that?
So I think one thing you got to think about when you start out is that every insurance company, every carrier gets what they call an AM Best rating, right? And that goes off of profitability of the company, how they pay claims, their financial standing, their backing, what kind of surplus they have. And those are all important factors, in an insurance carrier. So think about, the biggest names in the business, right? You watch TV, right? Mm-hmm. You see the Gecko, mm-hmm. you see Flow, mm-hmm. you see Mayhem, right? All these companies are companies that insure nationwide, all 50 states, right?
Yeah.
And so they pay a lot of money into marketing to make sure they get the broadest cast of a net to be able to try and market to the broadest people. All that money gets paid in there has to come from somewhere.
Right.
And it comes from your premiums.
Yeah.
Which is usually why those companies tend to be higher rates than other companies that may specialize in local markets. For example, Erie Insurance is our largest carrier. We've been an Erie agent for 43 years. We're one of the largest in the valley. They are in the top 13 northeastern states. So kind of from New York over to Wisconsin, down to Kentucky, back over to North Carolina, in that top quadrant. One thing you don't get a lot up here in this top quadrant, don't see too many hurricanes.
Yep.
Don't see too many tornadoes. Don't see too many earthquakes. Don't see any of that, wildfires, right? So those are all large losses that other main carriers have to pay claims on. And when they do, that means that everybody in the pool has to pay more money, which is why their rates are usually higher than other carriers like the ones we represent are. So when you talk about a good insurance, compared to a bad insurance, I think the one thing you need to start with is their AM Best rating, right? That'll give you a little overview of how good the quality of insurance is, how they pay claims, which is obviously the most important part, right?
Right. When
you get insurance, you want to make sure that if you have a claim, it is taken care of, and that it's taken care of the right way. So, other carriers that use nationwide exposures, and I'm talking about countrywide, they're paying a lot of claims in a lot of areas that if you have a company like Erie that only operates in the top 13 states, they don't have those exposures. Also, when's the last time you've ever turned on the TV and saw a commercial for Erie Insurance?
Right.
They don't waste money to pay in advertising like that because they would rather give it back to the policyholders, which is another reason why our rates tend to be better than most other carriers. So I think when you talk about that, again, we kind of drove down a little bit, but it does come down to the one most important thing is you buy insurance for a reason.
Yeah.
You buy it so that if you ever have that catastrophic loss, if you ever have that claim and you need it paid, that it's going to be taken care of 100%, right? Not going to be a headache, not going to be a pain to do. It should be seamless, smooth. And that's one thing that I think Erie does just as good as anybody in the business is they know that you're paying for a necessary evil, right? You may never have to use it. In fact, we all hope you never have to use your insurance, right?
Right.
But if you do, that it's going to be taken care of the right way. And then that's what makes, really, in my eyes, a great insurance company compared to the other one. Now, you touched on price. This is always a tricky debate, right? Companies will come into a market, they'll lower their rates, they'll do whatever, and they want to be the cheapest guy. Well, the old lesson I learned is anytime you go with the cheapest route, that usually is your most expensive option.
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
You do get what you pay for. Sometimes we're not always the cheapest in the business, and that's fine. But I can tell you that the benefits that they bring to the table will match or exceed most every other carrier, and that's where when you look at buying a peace of mind, I think it's worth every penny. So it's not thousands of dollars of difference, but it's definitely worth finding a good insurance company and that you hope you never have to use. But if you ever do, it's going to be done right.
Well, and not only that, I know, Mark, one of our buddies, was paying more money in insurance and had less coverage than when he did go to you guys and finally you sat down because they called a number on the TV and the number on the TV said, hey, here's how much it's going to cost. And they didn't bat an eye. They didn't question it for however long they had it for. So I think that's the other piece of it that we don't want to forget too, that makes, at least from my perspective, when you deal with somebody local, you can go in and have those conversations. You can ask those questions. When you're calling a number, their knowledge base is going to be limited to a wider perspective, as opposed to, understanding the local market and being able to analyze that and analyze your needs specifically, as opposed to, hey, we're insuring every single state in the 50 states, so you need the same price that Florida needs, or whatever that looks like, and you're not gonna deal with hurricanes or whatever like that. So I think that's an important piece to go over too, and it's helpful to know, like I said, that you guys are local and you can stop by and say hello and ask questions and do all that.
Absolutely. I mean, that's a key is having a good, not only carriers that you represent, but good agents that can advise you properly on what might be needed, to take a look at the whole picture and say that these are opportunities where you could have a loss, or quite frankly, you're the landlord and you're going to have something happen. Do you want insurance to hopefully help you with that? And that can be at face value. Seems sometimes pretty cookie cutter. Hey, you just have this coverage and this is what it is. Your house is insured for whatever, but that's not always the case. There can be so many other factors with HVAC systems now where you've seen broader coverage for mechanical, electrical breakdown type things, anything like that. Even laws and ordinances with building codes changing to where back in the day when you had knob and tube or fuse panel wiring, some places still have that. And then when you do have a loss, a fire, and they have to gut the whole place because now you have to have a breaker panel, there's an added cost. So there can be other little nuggets that you can build into a policy to help limit the insured's out-of-pocket expenses and hopefully have their insurance take the greater toll out of their wallets, right? And that's the key is knowing what you've got and looking at the bigger picture and trying to cater something to their needs to give them the best coverage we possibly can.
Absolutely. I think just really quickly, the other thing that I wanted to just highlight for those that are thinking about rental properties, in the event that you do have a somewhat catastrophic loss, one of the things that I've really appreciated about Erie is the loss of income piece, that they really do a good job taking care of. So say you have a tenant, your tenant floods the entire unit, and you got to go in there, you got to gut it, and so that tenant's not, they're not paying anything. So you still have a mortgage to pay. Well, Erie takes care of you, and as long as you have a lease in place, they'll honor that lease and they'll pay you monthly the cost that this person was paying. So just little things like that, whereas I know hearing stories of other carriers that won't do that. They don't offer that service. So just having that peace of mind of, man, something happened, or, even if it's not minimal, if you have to have even mold removal, if you have to have the tenant get out for, 6 weeks or whatever the case may be, having that backup is so big, and having the confidence that, you're going to be able to make your mortgage payments. You're going to be able to take care of that and deal with that appropriately. It's huge. It's huge.
Sounds like you're speaking from experience.
However,
I'll give you another example too. It's good, and this is just a quick testimonial to what a good insurance agent should be. When it boils down to it, we're not salespeople. We want to find you, the right coverage and the right protection for the right price. Period. Right? You'll notice that there was never said in there that we're always going to be the cheapest, right?
Yeah.
So, sometimes the risks are all different. There's a lot of factors that go into a risk. If you have a townhouse that's, 1 block away from this fire department right here in the middle of the city, and you have that same townhouse that's sitting up on the other side of, Gore next to West Virginia, and there's no fire department within 10 miles, they may be the same size, same price to rebuild, but it's going to be a different price, right? There's other factors that go in. In the end, we truly are risk analysts. That's what we do. We want to sit down and look at your exposure, no matter what that may be, and give you an overall view of what protecting it would look like. Because in the end, if you ever should have a claim, we don't want you to have to be out of pocket, like you said. There's so many other factors. Another quick example would be, we had an insured that had a house and was under a windstorm and took off half of the siding on the back side. Back when it was built, it was not required, law and ordinance, like David mentioned before, was not required to have a water barrier underneath of it, right? So when they lost the siding, then you would think, the insurance should just cover to put the siding back. But the law and ordinance now says that in order to put anything up now, siding, now it requires a water barrier. So now that piece has to be added in, and because they have a certain amount of coverage in there for law and ordinance coverage, it pays to have that siding water barrier added also, which was never there in the first place. See, most average agents would just say, the siding would be covered or it may not be covered subject to your deductible. we dig down a little deeper, right? We want to find out what's important and what can change in the industries that goes along, and we want to make sure that those coverages are always added. Now, does that mean it's going to be cheaper? Probably not.
Right.
But is it going to be insured correctly? That's the most important thing, right? So when we get into that, there's a lot of stuff, a lot of factors that come into play. And you can almost tailor any insurance policy, I think it's fair to say, to kind of what you want. But we're going to advise you to do it the right way, right? We've never been in the business for 43 years of taking shortcuts, and we're not going to start now. And again, that doesn't mean we're always going to be the cheapest, but we're always going to be the best at making sure that your coverage is right.
Well, and when you do have an issue, you know
it's covered.
Yeah, you guys got your back. All right, let's get into a little more of some of the other things. We've kind of covered, what are the precautions that it provides someone. If you guys want to talk a little bit about Erie, what do you think? I mean, we did go over a little bit about specifically Erie, but what other services can you think of off the top of your head that Erie provides that maybe other carriers don't provide? And whether that's, whether it's cheaper, more expensive. I can think of a couple. When I switched over to you guys, it was like really nice because it was like, wow, this is a nice feature that's added on. And I'm not talking about rental properties. I'm talking about just regular homeowners insurance and car insurance and whatever. But to kind of give people a heads up of what's out there and what insurance can actually do for you.
Well, let me mention real quick. I'll just go over it broadly, and then I'll let Dave talk a little more specifics about it because he's so much more knowledge about policies. But when you talk about kind of insurance policies in general, on the personal side, we do homes and autos and motorcycles and boats and RVs and personal umbrellas and that kind of stuff. On the commercial side, there's really 4 areas most people think about, especially when you have a business. Maybe it's a LLC or corporation or whatever you're going to do, whether it's rentals or any other kind of exposure. And that is you need a good GL policy, right, to give you your liability, and or package policy, which would throw in the coverage for any buildings and contents and those types of things. And the liability associated with that covers what you do, right? Whether it's rental properties or whether it's an accounting office or whether it's real estate sales, whatever. The second part of that is usually there's commercial auto in there, right? If you're using an auto in any kind of course for business, a lot of people think, well, I just got that car on my personal auto policy and I'm covered. That's not always the case, and they find out in the wrong way, not the right way. So we encourage them to, even if it's titled to you solely, can be on a commercial auto policy to give you better limits to match the limits according to your liability. And then third part, is the workman's comp issue, right? If you got employees at all, everybody likes to talk to their accountant and they say, oh, they tell us to pay them $10.99, they're just a subcontractor. Well, that's not true.
And this applies when you say you're growing your rental business and you're going to do that full time.
100%, right? And so if you have an employee or two, yes, the state does say that you are required by law, if you have 3 or more employees, including you, that you are mandated to carry workman's comp. However, if you only have 1 employee and you're telling this person what to do, when to do, and where to do it, regardless of how you pay them, right? It doesn't matter if your accountant says they need to be a 1099 employee because they're a subcontractor. There are laws in the state that deem whether they are or they aren't, and it does not revolve around payroll, right? That's why you need a good insurance agent to say, hey, you should really have workman's comp, because if that person gets hurt on the job, you are going to be responsible for paying their medical bills and their lost pay, right? And then the fourth factor of that is usually an umbrella, which will give you the protection over and above all the other coverages you have. So those are the kind of 4 main areas that we deal in when you're talking about any kind of investment, company, properties, whatever, in a commercial scene. After that, you can endorse all the extra coverages you want, from errors and omissions and professional liability. There's a whole suite of EPLI coverages, which is employee practices, that gets you the sexual misconduct, sexual harassment, wrongful hiring, wrongful firing type coverages. And then cyber is a big deal, right? Everybody talks about cyber nowadays. You can't turn the TV on without somebody getting data breached, right? Yeah. So, when you get into all that stuff gets added on as well, and then you can kind of cater it. Plus, we do a whole suite of flood policies and a big suite of bonding. Bonding is another big thing, right? Bonding covers crime. No normal insurance policy will cover crime. So if you have employees and they're in and out of people's locations when they're not home, doesn't matter how many people they had over as friends, right? The next time they had that $1,000 picture on the wall that comes up missing, they're going to go back and blame the last person, contractor, whoever that was there, right? Yep. Your normal insurance policy will not cover theft, right? It's crime. That's what you need bonding for. And we do a ton of bonding, right? Getting people bonded for employee services, employee crime, just all types of bonding as well. So, that's kind of how the coverages can kind of start out, and then everything can be dug a whole lot deeper than that. And we can cater to anybody's, anybody's exposures that they have. So,
well, Dave, let's talk quickly about umbrella policies, because I think this is a huge one that, your average person getting into this industry, buying their first rental property might think, oh, it's expensive, or, what it looks like from the outside is it can be expensive. I know it's not that much, and it provides a good security level for a small-time investor and a big-time investor as well. But can you talk a little bit more about what an umbrella policy is and, why it's beneficial to have one?
Sure. So umbrellas, hugely beneficial, for the little bit of money and the amount of liability they can provide. It's huge. And I always equate this. I give examples of like a family of four. I always equate this to an auto accident, and this would also, an umbrella would pick up, commercial auto policy too, type thing, to provide extra liability. So I always say, what would have happened? Paint the worst case scenario of you rear-end someone that has a family of four in it, and there's severe injuries, possibly death. What is that going to look like with how much money they're going to want from you? Could be in the millions. I would assume it would be. So a basic auto policy in general, commercial-wise, we would say you would have $1 million in liability. Personal, if you're lucky, most places are writing $100,000 per person, $300,000 per accident. It seems like a lot, but it isn't that much. So if there's a family of four involved and they won $2 million, where's the extra, $500 million coming from? That's the benefit to the umbrella, is it would kick in then to supply payments up to that an extra $1 million, or I did one the other day for $10 million. Pay an extra $10 million in compensation to these people for injuries, death, property damage, and that's what we're looking at. So when we equate that into homeowners or landlords or rental facilities, it can be a plethora of things. It could be something as simple as a handrail on a deck, and your tenant, or maybe the tenant has friends over, and that handrail floor, it could have been weathered. It detaches and somebody falls and breaks their neck. How much liability do you have on that landlord policy to provide those injuries versus had you had an umbrella? Maybe they do want $2 million. I would suspect, a broken back or a severe injury could get into the millions of dollars range. And that's what the benefit of the umbrella is. So a basic landlord policy, we would say you would have that on that investment property of, let's say, $1 million is kind of where I tell people, hey, put $1 million worth of liability on this policy that you're renting out this property, and then look at getting a $1 to $10 million umbrella, because unfortunately bad things happen. It could be something as simple as a fire. You don't know what's within the walls and the electrical system, but it could have been something that you as a landlord were responsible for that causes injuries or death to people. That could be something that's going to come back to you as a landlord, and maybe you are and aren't at fault. I'm going to say that's not always the where insurance helps you. Sometimes it's the legal defense, and that is one thing with Virginia, the duty to defend and your insurance and your liability. That's one of the biggest things you have, is if you get caught in a lawsuit, a dispute with somebody get injured at your property, that your insurance will step up and help you fight that legally, to hopefully you just aren't found negligent or liable for that injury or accident. So that's one of the key components, I'd say, to any insurance. Even your auto and your commercial stuff is that assistance with the defense cost, the attorney's fees, the lawsuits. Again, sometimes you aren't at fault, but you get drug into court, and that's where you can get into big money too. It's just the legal aspect of it. So that's the benefit to umbrella. Have extra coverage. Again, you're talking about pennies on the dollar. Some of these umbrellas, even on the personal side, are as low as $100 a year for an extra $1 million. Yeah, you can get into more, but most commercial umbrellas, I tell people, they're in the few $100 range, $500 maybe tops for a decent amount of liability extension. So I recommend it to everybody.
And remember also, one thing about the umbrella is that it covers over and above your existing liability limits that you have. So the policies that we usually write usually contain $1 million worth of liability anyway. Then you throw another $1 million on top, and like Dave said, the good thing about that is let's just say someone comes to your property, use the same example. Handrail was weathered. Maybe you knew it should have been fixed. Maybe you just hadn't got around to it or whatever. They go to grab the handrail, slip down the steps, break their back. Next thing you know, they're out of work for a year.
Right.
When I had my knee surgery last time in that motorcycle accident years and years ago, in fact, Dave was riding with me that day, ended up breaking both bones in my legs in half, had to have an implant put in. It was overnight surgery. I was in the hospital for 2 days and took 6 months to walk again. The total cost of that surgery alone was $120,000. So now, right off the bat, you're going to be responsible for $120,000 worth of medical bills, and that's more expensive nowadays than it was before, right? Yep. Then you're going to have the loss of work and their income, etc. So let's just say in that scenario, that claim comes back and it's $1.5 million they're trying to get out of you, right? If you don't have the umbrella, then your liability is going to pay the first $1 million if you're deemed liable, right? And then you're going to be on the hook for $500,000, right? But for $500 a year in a commercial exposure like that, you can get another $1 million. Now, the good benefit about that also is it kind of serves as a twofold purpose, right? It gives you that extra protection over and above every policy you have. So whether it's just the rental, or whether it's a rental and you have a commercial auto, or whether it's a rental commercial auto and the workman's comp, it's still $1 million over everything.
Okay.
So that's one good thing about that. The other thing is it does kind of serve as a stopgap. You know how today's society is. It's, such a litigious
Everybody
society.
wants to sue.
They want to be billionaires overnight, right? So if they go to court and they come back and go, well, we're going to try and sue them for $3 million, and you got $2 million of liability coverage, including your umbrella, it's going to be really hard to push past that $2 million limit. So insurance will at least show, hey, they were actually even more responsible because they carried $1 million on their policy or their regular liability, and then they were responsible enough to go buy another $1 million on top of it. A lot of times that'll help kind of limit those damages to the $2 million mark, kind of keep you, a little bit further out of trouble. So, it's always good to have, and like Dave said, for less than $40 a month, usually on a commercial exposure, you can get an extra $1 million over everything you got. So we always recommend people should carry an umbrella. In fact, you should carry one personally too, right? If you own rental properties or you own anything personally, put that umbrella in place. In a personal aspect, it's usually under $150 to $200 a year, and that will cover everything over your normal auto. It'll cover over your house. It'll cover over your rentals. It's just a good way to get a lot of coverage for a little bit of money.
Well, thank you guys so much for stopping by. It was a great conversation. As serious as it was, we're all, wearing sweatpants under the table, so it's not that serious, Oh no, we're good. No, so they're Walter & Walter Insurance Agency. You can look them up on any of your social media places, all that good stuff, and give them a call locally. Thanks for hanging out with us today, guys.
Appreciate it, man. Appreciate it. Blast.
Take it easy.